Hello. Today's episode number 56 of the Professor Slots podcast discusses starting a local gambling podcast. Plus, in this episode, I'll be covering the current state of slot machine casino gambling in the great U.S. territory of the U.S. Virgin Islands and the great U.S. state of Utah. Thank you for joining me for the Professor Slots podcast show. I'm John Friedel, and this is the podcast about slot machine casino gambling. It is where I provide knowledge, insights, and tools for helping you improve your slot machine gambling performance. In case you missed it, on my last episode, I went over 7 secrets to winning on slots during your Las Vegas visit. In fact, I added an 8th secret, but that's a secret. Shh. Further, I reviewed Tennessee and Texas slot machine casino gambling in 2019. I hope you enjoyed listening to my last episode as much as I enjoyed making it for you. Remember to visit ProfessorSlots.com/subscribe to get my free report revealing the top 7 online resources for improving your gambling performance, including the one I've used as a top-tier slot machine casino gambler. Let's start with the first segment of the show, why you need to start a recreational gambling podcast right now. The world needs you to start a recreational gambling podcast. Having a podcast is low cost. You don't need much equipment or services. Pretty much anywhere is good enough to record a podcast, and a great deal of fun. It's not even public speaking because you're typically alone or with a friend or two. What's not to like about starting a podcast? And what better topic than a hobby you already love, recreational gambling? This episode segment has the following sections. 1. An introduction. 2. Why you should start a podcast. 3. No, you don't need to be technically inclined. 4. A few steps further. 5. Podcasting equipment I use. 6. Help and resources. And 7. A summary. Gambling in the U.S. was once legal only in Nevada. Later, Atlantic City legalized gambling in the eastern United States. Then along came tribal casinos with Las Vegas gaming. Now, as of last year, the Supreme Court removed its federal ban on sports betting. In case you hadn't noticed, the gaming industry is booming. It's a dynamic time in many states as the gaming industry continues to grow. A lot is going on all over the place. In many states, too much is happening that's not shared. Your fellow gamblers need and want to know what you're seeing and experiencing. Having a local recreational gambling podcast is the solution, and you're just the person to do it. Just a few of the state-specific changes taking place in the last few months are: Virginians are excitedly preparing for the arrival of casinos. Pennsylvania hasn't built their approved satellite casinos. Plus, multiple airport casinos are still in negotiation. How's all that going to work out? Blackhawk is losing gaming revenue because Colorado built a bypass allowing visitors to arrive at their neighbor's Central City first, rather than the other way around after so many years. Once every week, I research and write about the current state of slots gambling in a U.S. state, territory, or the federal district. It takes me 13 months to get through all of them, and I've done it twice so far. I cover the U.S. slot machine gaming market. I can't report on casino slots developments in each state as closely as I'd like. No one person can. And this is where you come in. I can't research, think about, explain, visit the casinos, and otherwise study gambling in each state. Not weekly. But you can, with a podcast. You know your casinos. You know your state. I'm focused on slots, but you might like table games. Maybe you enjoy craps, blackjack, poker, or roulette. That's great. Tell people about what you are seeing and learning in your area during this dynamic time in the gaming industry. No one else is doing it, and the need is there. You have local knowledge, and people want to keep up with what's happening in your state or even at your local casino. People just like you. And having a fan base is excellent. Just today, Emiliano joined our Texas Slots community and wrote, "Thanks, John. Loyal listener of your podcast. Trying to get myself to Vegas, and this latest episode will come in handy." Imagine people feeling that way about your podcast. Wouldn't that be nice? There's something great about being of service to a community, even the recreational gambling community. Still on the fence about whether to start a recreational gambling podcast? Well, once you develop a following, you can start monetizing your podcast. Yes, even as a recreational gambling podcaster, you could still make enough to cover your costs. How hard is it to have a recreational gambling podcast, technically? Frankly, it's not very difficult at all. If you can handle emails, then you've got the necessary skills to have a functioning podcast. It's that easy to start podcasting. Let me take some of the mystery away with regards to having a podcast. You need 5 things to become a recreational gambling podcaster. 1. A computer, tablet, or smartphone with an internet connection or Wi-Fi. 2. A microphone. 3. A podcast host service. 4. A show name. And 5. A love of gambling. I'll tell you a secret. Podcasting doesn't work out if you don't love your topic. And I know you love gambling. Everything else is just minutia. These little details include not having a podcast show name with the words the or podcast in it. At its simplest, recording a podcast means talking into a microphone, saving the audio file somehow, uploading the audio file to a podcast host distribution service. Let's talk about the minimum necessary for each of these needs. First, please don't use the microphone built in on a laptop or computer. Those sound terrible. You're better than that. However, any microphone plugged into a computer or smart device doesn't sound terrible. Have a pair of Apple AirPods? Great. You got your microphone. Once you talk about whatever you want to talk about on your recreational gambling podcast episode, save the audio file someplace you can upload it. Upload where? To a podcast host service. What's a podcast host, you ask? I'll explain it. All podcast shows have podcast hosts. I assume you listen to podcasts? Well, you must. You're listening to this. As a listener, why would you know from where little podcasts come? Well, Spotify isn't where podcasters send their audio files, nor are they sent to any of the many other places people find podcasts, like, say, Google Podcasts. Instead, you'll upload your podcast episode to a service which does all that for you. Nice, yes? You might need to create a free account at Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio or TuneIn or other podcast destinations. But afterward, you provide that information to your podcast host, who takes care of the technical details. 2 of the best podcast hosts out there are Libsyn, for liberated syndications, and Blubrry, Blubrry. No, that's not a misspelling. The company name sounds like blueberry, but isn't, spelled like my favorite fruit. Both E's are missing. The monthly fee for having a podcast host starts at $5 per month on Libsyn and $12 per month on Blubrry. Either of these hosting plans is all you'll need to start distributing your podcast everywhere. That's all you need to start a podcast. But what happens if your recreational gambling podcast gets a little famous? Well, then you'll probably want a few other things to go along with it. What things? Well, a simple website would be helpful for your listeners. Each episode might have show notes. That's where you'll place links which you'll mention in the show, like local news articles, photos, or whatever else you might share with your audience. Well, how hard is it to have a website associated with your podcast? It's dead easy. The podcast hosts just mentioned offer that service too. But let's take this one step further. Maybe you want a unique URL for your website. If you plan ahead, you can even name your podcast something for which you can get the URL. Maybe yourname.com? Website hosting is like podcast hosting. You need both a location and a name. With names, that's your URL. The site, as mentioned, can start as a service offered by your podcast host. The podcast host will give you a URL, which is all that most podcasters use. However, these services will also allow you to attach your custom URL to their website service, but you provide that URL. How? A custom website URL starts around $1 per year at GoDaddy. Yes, that's per year. But all the advice I've heard says to spend the extra money to buy a URL which ends with .com. That'll cost you a minimum of $12 per year. It's well worth mentioning having the URL with .com at the end. People are unfamiliar with anything else. However, a lot of URLs ending in .com with common words are unavailable. You have a choice to make even after picking your podcast name. Let's say you named your show Casino Talk. I just checked, and CasinoTalk.com has been purchased and further is an active website explaining online gambling based in New Jersey. None of us can have that URL, but CasinoTalk.fun is available. You could buy that for a low price of 99 cents per year. But too many of your audience members would end up at the .com site rather than the .fun site. For all of us, typing .com has become automatic. There is one final step I must mention to you. I've read a lot of books and listened to a lot of podcasts on starting my Professor Slots business. Time and again, I have heard people express only one regret. I didn't start my email list soon enough. Your email list is a business asset. It's yours to care for and nurture. If you sell items on Amazon, buyers give their email to Amazon and not you. That buyer's email is Amazon's business asset. The same is true for Facebook and others. If Amazon or Facebook make a change to their terms and conditions, just like that, you've lost your audience. It is only then that you'll realize they never were your audience. It doesn't have to be this way for an independent or indie podcaster. If you start a podcast, also start an email list. Having a list doesn't mean you need a newsletter immediately. The point here is to start the list. Occasionally ask people to join, then have no regrets later when you need it. There are several email list services available, including Aweber and MailChimp. You may have heard of the latter due to its survey option. I use Aweber to maintain and grow my email list. This seems like the perfect time to welcome you as a fellow indie podcaster. Before I start the next section on the podcasting equipment I use, I wanted to jump in here and have a little heart-to-heart talk with you. I love being an indie podcaster. I enjoy chatting, talking, and meeting with like-minded slots enthusiasts like you. I feel like I am making a difference in the world with this podcast. Yes, I know that's a bold statement, but if I can help one person avoid a costly mistake at the casino, it reminds me of why I'm doing this. I haven't mentioned this before, this will be the first time, but 10 years ago I decided I needed to use my 8 college degrees, mostly in physics and engineering, to figure out a way to get out from under my massive student loan debt. I'll tell the longer story some other time, but I ended up looking for a business idea. Not a good business idea, but a great business idea. This thought came out of a quiet bookstore conversation with Larry Correia, Correia, best-selling author of The Monster Hunter Nation and other urban fantasy novels, but that full conversation is part of the longer story. I ended up looking for something fun, helpful, and potentially able to generate income to pay for my student loan debt. And 90 taxable jackpots in 9 months and then winning a car started me on my Professor Slots journey. Of course, first I had to figure out the business name I wanted. Do you know drslots.com is one of those URLs that's not available? Somebody owns the URL, but last I checked, it's not used. Besides, it sounds too medical. Only later did I come up with Professor Slots. Yes, these decisions are part of my origin story, as they say. Lately, I've learned I should share more of that story more often. So there's a tidbit. But sharing a bit of my story is also meant to be an example of what you might go through with the simple step of becoming an indie podcaster. Whether you plan for it or not, you could become popular, and you might like it. Let me put this perhaps strange suggestion to start a recreational gambling podcast in much more familiar terms. Have you ever gone up in tier level at your casino's players club? Did you feel a sense of increased, status? Have you ever been top tier or second to top tier? Nobody but you or I will understand this, but that's exactly what being an indie podcaster is like. I have gone to online and physical meetups with other podcasters, especially with others enrolled in the School of Podcasting, but they don't understand what it's like to have at least a little bit of status at a casino due to their tier status. You do. If our fellow podcasters did have any level of tier status, they'd feel the similarity. This next section originally included quite a few website links to the equipment and services I want to recommend for your consideration. Most links would direct you to Amazon so you know the precise equipment I'm referring to. The links to various services, like the Libsyn and Blueberry podcast hosts mentioned, lead to their respective websites. It's impractical to read off long links, so I've created a link in the podcast notes at professorslots.com/E56 to the article where you'll find all of these links. Hobbies are fun. People can spend a lot of money on their hobbies. As recreational gamblers, we know this to be true. You could easily pick up podcasting as a hobby. It doesn't cost much to start, as I have explained. But what if you want to start investing in your hobby? Maybe you want a better microphone than your earpods. Maybe the mic needs a stand, so you don't have to hold it when recording. Or you want to start editing your audio file with software to remove coughs or whatever. All these upgrades and more are available, but I mention them here because there are too many choices. If you wanted to invest in a few upgrades, what might you get? Let's start with a better microphone. Mics can get expensive fast, but low-end mics are great and inexpensive. I recommend the Audio-Technica ATR 2500 or the Samson, that's not Samsung, but Samson, Q2U, both just under $60 each on Amazon. Next up is audio editing software. I recommend free software for this, especially Audacity. If you have an Apple computer, then you already have free software for editing audio called GarageBand. Audio editing software which you can purchase includes Adobe Audition and Hindenburg Journalist. Both offer 30-day trials. That's all the audio editing software you'll likely ever need, but you might want an even better microphone. Again, there are a lot of options for podcast microphones. On my podcast, I have used the microphones mentioned, but I quickly upgraded to the Heil PR40, followed by the Shure SM7B I currently use. Both mics are lovely. They now cost around $400 new on Amazon. But with microphones with better sound quality comes the need for an interface between the mic and your computer. These microphones don't have a USB connection, but the interface does. These slightly better, more expensive microphones don't have a USB connection, but the interface does. You'll need to plug one or more mics into the interface, then plug the interface into your computer using a USB cable. The microphone interface I've enjoyed using is the Scarlett 2i2 from Focusrite. Other items would include accessories like microphone stands, cables, a pop filter, headphones, and maybe an inline preamplifier. The headphones I found to be very comfortable to wear for hours on end is the Beyerdynamic DT770 Studio Pro headset, 80 ohms. The microphone inline preamplifier I use is something I'll steer you away from, given the troubles I've had with it. That's what I got for trying to save a few dollars. Instead, I'll recommend the highly regarded Cloudlifter CL-1 preamp. Another inline preamplifier is the more inexpensive and more colorful SE Electronics DM1 Dynamite. Imagine sitting in your basement or at your kitchen table after the kids are asleep. Recording your podcast by yourself or with a few friends doesn't take much more. Well, let's say they aren't in the same room as you. Then you'll both need to get something like Skype to hold and record a conversation. Have you noticed how all this seems to want to snowball into more and more options? Interesting hobbies do that, you know. Plus, it's what can happen if you get famous. But as already mentioned, you can start and get by with a computer, external microphone, and an inexpensive podcast host. There are details here where you can potentially get stuck. The podcast hosts mentioned have lots of online resources to help explain much of it. This extensive technical support and library of solutions are reasons why I like them. But sometimes you'll need or want some direct help figuring out how all this podcast equipment, software, and services work together. I found a resource for beginning podcasters over a year ago. I signed up for a yearly subscription at Dave Jackson's The School of Podcasting. There, I learned everything I needed to start podcasting. If you have any trouble with learning the editing software or otherwise, I highly recommend learning more about each of these topics from Dave Jackson at the School of Podcasting. Besides having several podcasts, Dave teaches beginners how to podcast. He does this with online courses, weekly online office hours, monthly meetings in Northeast Ohio, and personal coaching. I found the online courses especially helpful. They explained in easy-to-understand terms how to use readily available audio editing software packages for podcasters. Further, he provides other online courses on using Skype for co-hosts and interviews, how to organize your podcast workflow, practical steps to monetizing a podcast, and more. He's also a great guy. I will also mention that recreational gambling podcasters are a community that helps each other. We call into other shows and meet up here and there. Get together with your friends and family, or maybe talk into a microphone yourself to start a recreational gambling podcast for your local area or state. Costs are minimal, such as having a $5 per month podcast host. Use your computer or smartphone, internet connection, and away you go. Why? Because nearly every state is finding themselves going through incredible gaming growth. People need and want to know what you know about the gaming industry in your local region. Besides which, it's a lot of fun. Jump in and start podcasting. The companies I've recommended in this episode aren't sponsors. To be clear, they have not paid me to mention them. I like their equipment and services and think you will too. Remember to visit ProfessorSlots.com/subscribe to get my free report revealing the top 7 online resources for improving your gambling performance, including the one I've used as a top-tier slot machine casino gambler. Up next is the second segment of the show on slot machine casino gambling. Here I provide a brief overview of the current state of gambling in 2 U.S. states, territories, or the federal district, emphasizing by far anything of interest to slot machine casino gamblers. Up first is U.S. Virgin Islands slot machine casino gambling in 2019. Here goes. U.S. Virgin Islands slot machine casino gambling consists of 7 casinos with one of them proposed. However, due to ongoing rebuilding efforts after the 2 hurricanes of September 2017, only the casinos on the islands of St. John and St. Thomas are currently open. The U.S. Virgin Islands are in the Caribbean about 40 miles east of Puerto Rico. This U.S. island territory consists of the main islands of St. Croix, St. John, and St. Thomas, as well as many surrounding minor islands. The minimum legal gambling age in the U.S. Virgin Islands depends upon the gambling activity. For land-based casinos and poker rooms, it's 21. For the lottery, it's 18. For bingo and pari-mutuel wagering, it's not available. A referendum held in November 1994 legalized casino gambling on St. Croix. However, at that time, voters rejected it on St. Thomas and St. John. Following the referendum, the legislature voted to legalize casino gambling in St. Croix on April 27, 1995. The Virgin Islands Casino and Resort Act of 1995 allowed the issuance of 6 casino licenses. It intended to stimulate the economy of the island of St. Croix, specifically the tourism sector. Per this act, only a major hotel and convention facility can have a casino. Sometime after this initial referendum result, apparently, casino gambling became legalized on the islands of St. Thomas and St. John. This status is only apparent because the websites for those locations state that they have slot machines available. Therefore, use some caution before assuming these locations have legalized gaming options. Online casino games and poker are available in the U.S. Virgin Islands, yet licenses have not been issued. Players are unprosecuted for playing in offshore casinos. The U.S. Virgin Islands does not block online casino websites. In most U.S. gaming jurisdictions, with the known exception of New Jersey, these online casino websites are blocked. You simply can't get to them online. Even in New Jersey, you can't access these websites without being identified by your physical location through cell phone towers as being within the state. Given how approximate positioning by cell phone towers is, it's not GPS after all, you'll need to be about a mile or so within New Jersey's state border to be identified as being within the state. Weekly, I get emails from online slots casinos asking if I'd be interested in showing advertisements on my website for their online casino. How much, they ask. I never respond, in part because all these emails appear automated like a robot wrote them. But I also know you have no interest in online slots casinos. How do I know this? Because you don't have access to them unless you live in New Jersey and possibly a few other states. And I know the New Jersey Gaming Commission already does have a thorough job vetting and assessing these sites for New Jersey residents. So that's my rant on online slots casinos. For practical reasons, I don't have much to do with them here at Professor Slots. Next up is the hugely short statement about slot machine private ownership, which I have included in case you live in this U.S. territory and are considering owning a slot machine. Here it is. It is unknown whether it is legal or not to privately own a slot machine in the territory of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Simply put, I cannot find any laws that prevent it. That doesn't necessarily make it legal, though. It just doesn't appear to be covered by current law. The Virgin Islands Casino and Resort Control Act of 1995 established the U.S. Virgin Islands Casino Control Commission. The commission does not have a website, but its main phone number is area code 340-718-3138. The Casino Control Commission issued its first 2 casino licenses in 1998. After the passing of Hurricane Lenny in November 1999, the first St. Croix casino opened in March 2001. One of the main functions of the commission is the issuance of licenses to prospective investors and employees. The commission has a physical presence, through inspectors and agents, during the operation of the casino. The Division of Gaming Enforcement, a unit within the Department of Justice, is the commission's investigative and enforcement arm. The division's primary function is to investigate the qualifications of each applicant before the commission issues any license, permit, or certification to that applicant. Further, the DGE requires they verify any jackpot of $25,000 or more. In this next section, I'll discuss U.S. Virgin Islands gambling establishments. There are 7 commercial casinos on the island of St. Croix, St. John, and St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Most of these casinos are not open or only proposed as casinos. If traveling to the U.S. Virgin Islands, be sure to check the status of any casinos you plan to visit on those islands. The largest casino in the U.S. Virgin Islands is the Debbie Carina Bay All-Inclusive Beach Resort and Casino on the island of St. Croix, which has 360 gaming machines and 17 table games. The second largest casino, once it opens, will be the Golden Resort on the island of St. Croix. There are 4 casinos on the island of St. Croix, 1 casino on St. John, and 2 casinos on St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. As of a month or so ago, when I last checked, the St. Croix casinos were all closed for various reasons. As usual, when there are too many casinos to mention here, a complete list along with links to their websites, assuming they've set one up, is available on my website blog article at professorslots.com/VI. There are no American Indian tribal casinos on the U.S. Virgin Islands. As an alternative to enjoying U.S. Virgin Islands slot machine casino gambling, consider exploring casino options in a nearby state. Bordering this island territory is to the northeast, Florida, to the east, the Atlantic Ocean, to the south, the Caribbean Sea, and to the west, Puerto Rico. To visit either of my articles on this U.S. state or territory, simply visit professorslots.com followed by its two-letter postal designation. For example, my Florida slots article is available at professorslots.com/FL. No payout return limits or statistics are available from the U.S. Virgin Islands Gaming Control Commission. Are you interested in sharing and learning with other slots enthusiasts in the U.S. Virgin Islands? If so, join our new U.S. Virgin Islands slots community on Facebook at professorslots.com/FBVI. You can find all 56 slots communities if you simply go to professorslots.com/FB, followed by the two-letter postal designation for that state or territory. These are shortcuts I've created for your convenience. To freely join any of these groups, all you'll need is a Facebook profile. There, you'll be able to privately share your slots experiences as well as chat with players about slots gambling on or near the U.S. Virgin Islands. Come join us. U.S. Virgin Islands slot machine casino gambling consists of 7 casinos. These casinos are on the islands of St. Croix, St. John, and St. Thomas. However, most casinos are closed for renovation. These rebuilding efforts were a result of the massive damage caused by 2 Category 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, in September 2017. Before making travel plans to the U.S. Virgin Islands with an intent to gamble, be sure to check the updated status of any casinos you plan to visit on the islands comprising this U.S. territory. There has been little to no changes in the gaming industry of the U.S. Virgin Islands since the widespread devastation caused by Hurricanes Irma and Maria in late 2017. Remember to visit professorslots.com/subscribe to get my free report revealing the top 7 online resources for improving your gambling performance, including the one I've used as a top-tier slot machine casino gambler. Up next is the second state comprising this episode segment, Utah slot machine casino gambling in 2019. Here goes. Utah slot machine casino gambling does not exist due to religious reasons. It's one of only 2 states where gambling is strictly illegal. However, slot machines are available across Utah's borders to its neighboring states. The minimum legal gambling age in Utah does not depend upon the gambling activity. The minimum legal age for any form of gambling in Utah is not available as all forms of gambling are illegal. Utah is one of only 2 states, with the other being Hawaii, where gambling is strictly illegal. However, unlike Hawaii's economic analysis decision-making approach, Utah prohibits all forms of gambling due to religious reasons. Regarding slot machine private ownership, it is illegal to own a slot machine in the state of Utah privately. Utah does not have state gaming commissions to provide gaming regulations for casinos, the lottery, parimutuel wagering, or charitable gaming. There are no casinos in Utah. However, Utah has several bingo halls in Salt Lake City, Huntsville, Kearns, Ogden, and Riverdale. Some bingo facilities have electronic gaming machines offering video bingo. After legally challenged with offering illegal gambling for charging a fee for providing bingo along with a dinner, the bingo facilities responded that the paid dinner in question was optional. The courts later ruled that it is not gambling if the bingo cards are free of charge with no obligation to pay for dinner. It is also perhaps worth mentioning that there are rumors of illegal poker rooms available within the state of Utah, even high-limit poker game rooms. Utah has 7 federally recognized American Indian tribes. However, Utah has no tribal casinos. As an alternative to enjoying Utah slot machine casino gambling, consider exploring casino options in a nearby state. Bordering Utah is, to the north, Idaho and Wyoming, to the east, Colorado, to the south, Arizona, to the southwest, New Mexico, and to the west, Nevada. To visit any of my articles on these U.S. states, simply visit professorslots.com followed by its 2-letter postal designation. For example, my Idaho slots article is available at professorslots.com/ID. The nearest slot machines are in West Wendover in Nevada, about 123 miles west of Utah's Salt Lake City. The 4 casinos in West Wendover have a total of 3,550 slot machines. For more information on West Wendover casinos, see my podcast episode number 41, West Wendover, Nevada Payout Returns, Colorado, Connecticut Slots in 2018. Utah is interesting in terms of slot machines. Yes, they prohibit gambling as much as it is anywhere. Hawaii prohibited gambling just as much, but with well-thought-out economic reasons. but there are still people in Utah that want to play slots, and Nevada does what it can to accommodate them by allowing so many casinos in West Wendover, Nevada. Further, other neighboring states to Utah have done something similar, including Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. It's practically a cottage industry, and lots of real money is being made by these other states due to taxing gaming revenue which Utah is missing out on. Utah must be feeling the pressure. Anybody know how the Utah state economy is going? No payout return limits or statistics are available from Utah. Are you interested in sharing and learning from other slots enthusiasts in Utah? If so, join our new Utah Slots community on Facebook at professorslots.com/FBUT. All you'll need is a Facebook profile to freely join this closed Facebook group. There, you'll be able to privately share your slots experiences as well as chat with players about slots gambling in or near Utah. Come join us. Utah slot machine casino gambling does not exist. Utah is one of only 2 states, the other being Hawaii, where gambling is strictly illegal. The nearest slot machines for Utah residents are in West Wendover in Nevada, 123 miles directly west of Salt Lake City. Bingo is legal in Utah, but only if offered free of charge. Some bingo halls have electronic gaming machines offering video bingo. Over the last year, there has been no change in the lack of gaming in the state of Utah. Remember to visit professorslots.com/subscribe to get my free report revealing the top 7 online resources for improving your gambling performance, including the one I've used as a top-tier slot machine casino gambler. Part 1 of the next episode of the Professor Slots podcast is a review of the 2019 annual financial report for International Games Technology PLC, the longer form name of slots manufacturer IGT. To make a suggestion or ask a question which might end up as a blog article or on a podcast episode, email it to john@professorslots.com, where John is spelled Jon, or by calling 702-90-SLOTS to leave a voicemail. Part 2 of the next episode of the Professor Slots podcast are more brief overviews of the current state of gambling in 2 U.S. states, territories, or federal district. Next time, I'll be talking to you about the great U.S. states of Vermont and Virginia. That's the end of another great episode of the Professor Slots podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Show notes for this episode are now available within most podcast apps, but are also available on my website at professorslots.com/E56. I plan to have the next episode come out very soon for you, where I'll have more amazing content for the show. Until the next episode, have fun, be safe, and make good choices. Bye.